It began not in a grand stadium, but in a muddy cattle market. The most iconic symbol of Roman power, the gladiator, was born from a private sacred duty to the dead. The Forum Boreum in 264 BC smelled of damp stone, wet earth, and cattle dung. Beneath a gray, open sky, the crowd was small, somber. This was not a public holiday. They had gathered to mourn. Nobleman Decimus Junius Brutus Sceva had just buried his father. To honor him, he staged a naval rite. 3 pairs of slaves, armed and armored, were forced to fight to the death. The historian Livy would later record this as the first gladiatorial combat in Rome. But this was no sport. There was no cheering. This was a munus, a duty owed to the deceased. Their blood was a solemn offering, a final payment to a soul journeying to the underworld. This brutal ritual wasn't a Roman invention. It was an imported custom. Borrowed from conquered peoples they considered their superiors in the art of death. The Romans saw this practice in the cities of Campania like Capua and among their fierce enemies, the Samnites. For them, human sacrifice at the tombs of great warriors had slowly evolved into ritual combat. The death itself became less important than the skill of the fight. It was, as the Christian writer Tertullian later observed, the spilling of blood for the sake and satisfaction of the dead, but one that had already begun to entertain the living. The Roman state, seeing its power, would soon absorb this private grief into its machinery of control. By the late 3rd century BC, these duels began to escape the confines of funerals. Ambitious politicians, especially aediles, saw their potential. They incorporated them into the Ludi Romani, public games originally held to honor Jupiter. The Senate, seeking divine favor or public order, voted to fund them. Blood became a currency for political popularity. Death became a publicly funded display. Temporary wooden bleachers sprang up in forums. Then they became permanent stone amphitheaters. What started as a somber rite in a muddy forum was codified, scheduled, and weaponized by the state. With each drop of blood spilled in the sand, Rome was writing a new kind of law, one not inscribed on bronze tablets, but in the collective psyche of its people. But the Romans soon realized a man fighting a man was not enough. To truly demonstrate their dominion over the world, they brought nature itself to its knees in the arena. The iron gate groaned open, and a nervous silence fell over the crowd. From the shadows, a lone figure emerged, barefoot, half-naked, armed with nothing but a short, cheap blade. Across the sand, another cage door rattled upward. A lion, its ribs pressing against its matted fur, stepped into the sunlight. It was starved, alert, and coiled with a hunger sharpened by man. This was no duel. It was an execution, a statement. By the 1st century CE, the arenas had become theaters for man's forced confrontation with the entire natural world. This practice had 2 names, reflecting its dual purpose: venations, the hunts, and the chilling damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to beasts. The condemned, criminals, prisoners of war, Christians, rebellious slaves, were thrown to lions, leopards, bears, and other exotic creatures hauled from across the empire. The animals were often weakened by hunger to ensure a swift and violent end, eliminating the condemned in a spectacle designed to dehumanize them and terrify onlookers. Generals like Pompey the Great, decades earlier, had realized the political power of such exotic spectacles. He famously orchestrated shows where men were cast against elephants, a display so bloody it allegedly upset the crowd. The message was clear. Rome commanded not only human enemies, but the beasts of the earth. But not all who faced the beasts were condemned. Some were trained specialists, the bestiarii, who fought for pay or glory. Mosaics and stone reliefs from the empire depict these scenes with grim detail. A fighter with a spear braced against a lion, S-lunge, a netcaster dodging the claws of a panther. This was dangerous professional work. And we have physical proof. In Roman Britain, archaeologists unearthed the skeleton of a man, likely a gladiator, whose pelvis was scarred by deep bite marks that perfectly matched the jaw of a large feline, like a lion or tiger. The bones told a silent story. He had died locked in combat with the beast, far from home, for the entertainment of a provincial crowd. In the face of such orchestrated terror, the only choice left for some was the choice of how to die. The philosopher Seneca wrote of prisoners headed for the arena who chose to take their own lives before the show, rather than suffer a death meant to entertain a roaring mob. It was a final, silent act of rebellion, the last sliver of control a person could claim in a system designed to strip them of everything. The roar of the lion was not just nature unleashed, it was the amplified voice of Roman power, a sound engineered to evoke both awe and utter submission. If controlling men and beasts wasn't enough, Rome decided to command the most unpredictable element of all: water. They didn't just flood the arena, they staged full-scale naval battles within it. Imagine the scene. The water glistens under the Roman sun, calm for only a moment. Then, drums thunder, war horns cut through the air, and two full fleets of triremes surge toward each other. Soldiers armed with spears and catapults stand on the decks. Below them, thousands cheer, not from distant riverbanks, but from stone bleachers. This was not war. It was the naumachia. Julius Caesar staged the first recorded naumachia in 46 BC. He had an artificial lake excavated near the Tiber to reenact a battle between Tyrian and Egyptian fleets. This was no play. They used real warships, real weapons, and real men, condemned prisoners and prisoners of war, who fought not as actors, but as soldiers with no hope of survival. The spectacle was a triumph of logistics and brutality. Augustus, not to be outdone, upped the ante. In 2 BC, he constructed an enormous basin measuring 1,800 by 1,200 Roman feet. So vast it required its own aqueduct, the Aqua Alsietina, just to fill it. On those man-made waters, 30 warships clashed, manned by 3,000 convicts. The scale was staggering. The message was clear. Rome could command not just armies, but geography and the sea itself. The most famous words associated with the games likely came from a naumachia. In AD 52, Emperor Claudius staged a massive spectacle by draining Lake Fucine. As Suetonius records, the condemned fighters saluted him with the phrase, "Ave Imperator, morituri te salutant." Hail Emperor, those who are about to die salute you. Whether those words were scripted or spontaneous, they capture the raw, fatalistic truth of the spectacle. And evidence suggests that even the Colosseum itself could be flooded for smaller naval battles, a terrifying feat of Roman engineering. Each naumachia was more than a performance. It was a ritual of total domination. By the height of the empire, execution was refined into high theater. The midday break became a time for the most perverse form of storytelling, where ancient myths were brought to life with real blood and real agony. When the Colosseum opened under Emperor Titus in AD 80, the games lasted 100 days. Between the gladiator matches and the hunts came the meridiani, the midday executions. But these were not simple beheadings. Emperors began staging elaborate mythological tortures. The poet Martial, an eyewitness, described these horrific plays. An Orpheus entered the arena to enchant wild beasts with his music and lyre. But unlike the myth, where nature bends to his will, the arena's bear was unmoved. It mauled the performer on cue. In another reenactment, a man playing the inventor Daedalus was hurled from his fake wings by a stage mechanism and ripped apart by a wild animal. Martial wrote with bitter irony, "How you must wish you had your feathers now." One of the most disturbing was the myth of Pasiphae, the queen cursed to fall in love with a bull. Roman crowds witnessed a woman, or a condemned man in disguise, thrown to a beast in a twisted imitation of her fate. Fire also played its role. The tunica molesta, a pitch-soaked garment, was fastened to the condemned and set ablaze. Sometimes this was framed as the death of the hero Mucius Scaevola, who proved his loyalty by holding his hand in a fire. The result was the same: human torches, their screams drowned out by the crowd's applause. The Christian writer Tertullian, whose people were often the victims, bitterly described how they were mocked as kindling men, their pain masquerading as moral spectacle. This was control wrapped in ritual. Rome didn't just kill. It offered the audience a perverse catharsis by making death an echo of divine punishment. In the arena, myth was not read. It was endured. From the funeral rites of a grieving son to the state-sponsored horrors of the Colosseum, Rome's spectacles were never just entertainment. They were a deliberate, calculated engine of power. Blood on sand, water, and flame forged a culture that measured its authority by its choreography of death. Their chilling legacy forces us to ask an uncomfortable question: which of these spectacles most exposes the heart of Roman control? Was it the funeral duel politicized, the beast hunt weaponized, the naval battle artificialized, or the myth tortured into reality? As the philosopher Seneca warned after a day at the games, "I come home more greedy, more ambitious, more self-indulgent. Yes, even more cruel and inhuman, because I have been among human beings." Which one do you think reveals the true nature of Roman power? Was it the gladiators, the beast hunts, the naval battles, or the mythological executions? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.